surrounding areas, wherever they may be, to a slowly growing YouTube channel. Our hair is continuing to get longer. I said
I know.
there's been a run on toilet paper first, then hair dye. I said the next run is going to be on like hair ties or something because
Or clippers or
hedge
scissors
trimmers.
for
I
those
don't know.
brave enough to cut their own
Yeah,
hair.
don't cut your own things is what I keep hearing. So I haven't, but it's getting bad.
I
Uh,
know, right? I know. I'm feeling it too.
anyway, welcome everyone, and Holy Week is behind us. We're in Easter week now, and I hope you all had a wonderful Easter wherever it was. Little less competition for the Easter eggs this year if you've been hunting for them. So
Yeah.
hopefully that went well. So this first Sunday after Easter, thanks to for Catholics is a little special. So thanks to John Paul II, not so long ago, this became a feast of divine mercy. There's an image that gets associated with that. Saint Faustina, there's this whole tradition and all these little practices and things. But I did look into this beforehand, and we're still using the same scriptures. And so John 20:19 and 31, talking about doubting Thomas. So why don't you let her rip, Aaron?
Nice. So here's John chapter 20, starting in verse 19. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And after he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. And then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. And Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent you, so I send you. As the Father has sent me," he said, "so I send you." When he said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." And Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." And Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to
Thanks be
God.
to God. Um, there is so much to unpack here. When we were talking
Yeah.
about what passage to kind of talk about, I was like, oh, I don't know if our readings are going to overlap. Maybe we'll miss. And you're like, no, John. There's just so much good stuff here, and I can see why. So faith is a huge part here as we talk about doubting Thomas. The very nature of the resurrection, which Christ has undergone, and which we hope to join him someday. But right at the beginning, and I think this is such an important message in this time, there's so many anxieties about health, our financial future, whatever they may be. And again and again and again, as Jesus is speaking to the disciples who were themselves anxious for so many reasons, peace be with you. We have, what is it, 3 times in this passage alone that I count. Maybe I'm missing some here. But, every time Jesus shows up, the very first thing he's getting across is, peace be with you. Angels appear and they're telling people, do not be afraid. Just a constant reminder that we need so badly. it's normal to be anxious. It's normal to be worried about all these things that are happening in the world. But we've got to sometimes sit down and say, okay, yes, I'm anxious, but I'm going to trust God. We're gonna get through this, and my future is in His hands. Even if that future is, and it ultimately will be someday, a resurrection. But I guess I said I like to kind of grab, or if something in the passage grabs me, that's what I like to pick up on. And I was reading kind of recently this idea of the marks that are on Jesus. So sometimes I do something really stupid and I wind up hurting myself. So I'm about 6 feet tall. Ceilings are just a little lower for me. Sometimes you go to put something in the refrigerator, you're putting away your groceries, you stand up a little too quickly, you hit your head on the freezer door. I don't know if you've ever done that. Or you hit your head.
Doors.
Yeah.
Cabinet doors for sure.
Cabinet doors. And it's like, ow. That was dumb. Like I knew that was there. I opened it a minute ago. How did I forget already? And there's like a second moment later, because I feel like pain is supposed to like don't do this. It's like this message that your body is sending to you, like, this is bad, don't do this. And like 10 minutes later when it still hurts, it's like, okay, I got the message. We can stop hurting now. This experience is unpleasant. I won't do it again, all right? You're like you're trying to make a deal with your body, right? I'm tired of feeling pain right now. I got it. I understand. And I think so often for me, pain is a very useful analogy for emotional pain as well, emotional suffering, loss, a regret, something that we did, something that we didn't do, a loved one that is no longer with us. There's this pain, and the pain seems to come back in ways that don't always make sense. They're just there. You say like, okay, I want this pain to be gone. I want this experience of guilt to be gone. But the body and the heart has its own time for healing. And I think in Jesus' resurrection, and this is what this book was trying to get at, we have this sign that even though he's not going to die, even though he's back with all kinds of power and glory, and he's making such an impression on these people that he needs to say, peace be with you, and he can zoom through doors, and he still has these marks of his painful experiences that are on him. They're a part of him now. They've become a part of who he is. He will always be someone that has undergone the crucifixion, that has made a change in him. And so I think as we go forward, we're always going to have darker moments in our lives. We have high points, we have low points. It's just what it means to be alive. We're going to have times where we're anxious, where anxiety is a very natural human response. Anyone would be anxious in these moments that we're all facing. Anyone needs, again, that reminder to find peace. But I think as we look at Jesus, it's okay to have these marks as well. To say that, this hurts, that we've known loss, that stinks, and you wish you could get rid of these negative feelings or this pain. But I think Jesus is showing us here that this is normal and this is okay, that healing takes place in its own time. And so that's kind of what grabbed my attention as I was looking at this. And
As you're talking about that, I think it's interesting, that first part of the section that we read where he appears to the first disciples and he says peace to them twice. It reads to me almost as if Jesus is kind of trying to get it across. It's like, peace to you. Oh, okay, I see. It didn't stick. I said peace to you.
Did I stutter?
but what happens, right? But what happens in between is interesting, where, if I'm trying to communicate a message of peace, like in a time like this, how I might do that is like maybe show an image of the trial having ended, right? Like if I'm trying to comfort someone, maybe saying like, hey, it's over, like don't worry, or like show them, if I'm Jesus, I'm gonna like show them some sort of vision of the future, like, hey, look, it ends someday, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
don't worry about it. But what he does is he shows them the evidence of his suffering, right? Which is interesting. It's not like he shows them his hands inside and see, guys, it's totally healed, right?
Yeah.
Or it's gone, right? But he shows them the wounds
Yeah.
that he still bears, and it's like, I think I think maybe that's important, right? That he says, peace, peace with you. And it's even while I'm bearing these wounds still that you are all, aware of, that I can say it to you again. Like, no, 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 like it's okay. Like, I bear these wounds, but like there is still peace.
Yeah,
Um,
healing
like
isn't.
that
It's
that
not. It's not
seems,
time travel. It's not like putting things back exactly the way they were. It's like he's still injured, but he's somehow okay. There's a healing that is
yeah,
taking place.
yeah. I like that. I kind of think of the um way that Jesus is referred to in the book of Revelation of, so the lamb that was slain, right? Like that's kind of
Right.
an
Yep.
identifying marker, right? Um,
Yeah. Yep.
the lamb that was slain, the 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 sacrifice part of it is kind of a enduring characteristic of Jesus and why he matters. And I think that probably says something to us too about our own experiences and our own suffering and why it matters.
Yeah, I think I sometimes get so caught up on the paradox of that. You know, the night that was day, the day that was night, the 1,000 years that was like a day, the day that was like 1,000 years. You know, that the Bible will often have these little contrasts that I sometimes focus on the contrast so much that I don't pick up on like what the contrast is communicating. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, to have been slain, to have suffered all the anxiety that would go with that, you know, and still to have endured and to be able to relate that experience to others. You know, to say, I know what it's like to have been slain. I know what it's like to have been anxious and to suffer. And I'm here to tell you that you still have a future. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's really good. I'm trying to find the lyrics of a
Oh,
him.
God, he's gonna sing. Oh no. Oh no. I'm gonna edit this part out. All right.
um, no, I'm not going to sing. I promise. Um, but there's a line in here. Oops, sorry. There is a line in here. Gosh, I'm just gonna spend like 2 seconds on this, and if I can't find it right away, then I'm just gonna move on. It's one of my favorite hymns, though. It's do you know gosh, Gustav Holst, I think
Holst.
is his name,
Yes.
composer. He
Thaxted.
wrote The Planets.
Yeah, Thaxted. I think is
And
what you're probably thinking of.
yes,
Oh God, beyond all
exactly.
praising.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one. So
Okay. All
in
right.
that
Yeah.
hymn, right, there's this line that goes um then hear, O gracious Savior, accept the love we bring, that we
Oh
who know
God, I'm
your
singing
favor
now.
may serve you as
As
our
our
King.
king. Yes.
And whether our tomorrows be filled with good or ill, we'll triumph through our sorrows and rise to bless you still. And like that's the image that comes to my mind as I am thinking about what you're talking about, as these wounds of Jesus, sort of as an important part of who he is and what sort of Christian life is about, right? It's not maybe about trying to find the path of least resistance or something,
Mm.
but kind of realizing that come whatever, we will triumph through it, and
Mm-hmm.
because of Jesus, and we'll have our own wounds to bear at the end of it all, and we will be able to like rejoice because God has brought us through it, just as God brought Jesus through his suffering. And I think that's an
Mm-hmm.
important thing to remember about Jesus. That's good stuff, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm a little uncomfortable telling other people's stories, I guess. So I'll just say it was a very dear friend of mine in college. I don't think I've told this story on this channel before. I think I've used it in a homily, perhaps. But he had a lot of suffering in his life, a lot of physical suffering and surgeries and things like that. And he limped a bit because he had a screw in his foot. And I remember telling him, once, like, in a kind of a casual way, like, oh, it'd be so neat to be in heaven, and you won't have that screw in your foot anymore. You'd be like normal. And I didn't have a lot of experience working with anyone with any kind of disability or anything at that point. And he stopped me, and he said, "No, I'll have this screw in my foot in heaven, because this has become a part of who I am, and I'm going to be in heaven, and this is me." Now, he's not imagining that heaven is going to be a place of suffering or torment in any sense, just as I'm sure Jesus isn't enduring physical suffering because he still has his marks in his hands and his feet. But this experience has become a part of who he is. It's changed us, and so that's something that we bring to heaven, I think. Not in a negative sense, and not that we're bringing any piece of suffering into heaven, but the fact that we've endured suffering, and as you said, from God beyond all praising, we've triumphed. That's the promise here. Not that suffering won't happen, not that suffering is all magically undone and reversed in time travel, but that we've suffered and we've triumphed anyway.
Mm-hmm. That's good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think about that sometimes when, like, I imagine, right, the life after this and what it will be like. And I think, I hear people sometimes say something along the lines of, like, I hope I just can, like, forget everything in my earthly life or something in the next one. And I think sometimes I've imagined it that way myself, that it'll just be so different, so perfect, so much better that I will forget all of this. And then it's like, first of all, I don't think that is true. But then second of all, I don't know if I want that to be true. I think, there's like a rich depth in my understanding of, like, God's faithfulness and love in understanding my pain and in understanding, the amount of suffering I have endured, right? I mean, there's a way that I come to love God more and desire to know God more because of what I've learned about God through those moments.
And I think, too, in those darker moments, I think that darkness has a way of sort of like narrowing our vision and our imagination, such that you think the only way I could ever be happy is if I forgot all this. And I think even in that moment, that's okay if that's the very best you can imagine of heaven right now, like then that's where you're at, and that in and of itself is some spark of hope in the darkness. That even if it's just a place of forgetfulness. Sometimes I think sleep can be such a comfort. It's sometimes heaven, like, the closest analogy is just like, I'm just gonna sleep, and then but hope has a way of growing. Maybe someday that becomes something better. Maybe someday you're in a place where you could go back and find healing for some of those memories. But I think for some people right now, that's just too much to hope for. For any of us at some point in our lives, that's too much to hope for. We can't even imagine it.
Yeah, totally agree. So I have some thoughts about this passage.
Go for it. Let's keep swapping off here. Take turns.
I think you maybe. I think this is like a thing I tend to do. Maybe it's not. So maybe you have or haven't noticed this, but I like to, like, when I look at a text, my mind goes to, like, what's a different way that I can think about this? Like, how can I try to maybe view this in a new way?
I don't agree with him all the time, but G.K. Chesterton, I feel like, is one that does that with texts, where you take it and you're like, okay, I want to turn this upside down. Like, what falls out? Okay, go for it. So
I first encountered this idea that I'm going to talk about through one of my professors in seminary. He's the New Testament, the distinguished chaired New Testament professor at Princeton Seminary. His name's James Charlesworth. He wrote a book about it called The Beloved Disciple. So if you,
Mm-hmm.
oops, are you still there?
Yeah, still here.
Sorry, my oh man, so my Mac is trying to upgrade to a new operating system. So hopefully this
All right.
stays. So he I don't that interrupted my thought. Sorry about that. Uh, he if you want to know more about that's the book that you can check out, The Beloved Disciple by James Charlesworth. So anyway,
Okay.
the beloved disciple, right, shows up um, at times in our reading of John's gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, not quite so much in this passage that we read,
Mm.
or does he?
Dun dun dun. All
So
right.
the I think the traditional reading of who is being referred to as this beloved disciple
Mm-hmm.
is that perhaps it's the apostle John, who
Mm-hmm.
is the gospel writer, writing sort of himself in a more like self-deferential kind of way, like not trying to
Mm-hmm.
call too much attention to himself
Mm-hmm.
by name, and so he gives himself this epithet. um,
And often in art
and
depicted as a sort of a young fellow, you know. So
Yeah,
yeah,
sure,
yeah.
exactly. So there are times that we see him, right, reclining on the breast of Jesus during the Last Supper.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we see him uh, at the cross, at the foot of the cross with the mother of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
We see him this year, during our Easter readings from John chapter 20, just before this, as going with Peter to the empty tomb
Mm-hmm.
after Mary Magdalene was there. And we see him some other places as well. Um, there's maybe a reason to believe that instead of the Apostle John,
Mm-hmm.
the one whom Jesus loved is a reference to, are you ready for it? Thomas. And so here's
I have
the
never. Okay, that is not where I thought you were going with this. All right,
here's
I've never heard this. All right.
here's the rationale, right? We give
Okay.
Thomas a bad rap.
Yeah.
He's called Doubting Thomas, and we call him that pejoratively.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what if the Gospel of John is trying to show us, how do I put this, Thomas's desire for like hard evidence and a real experience, not as something to be like pushed away,
Mm-hmm.
but as maybe something uh, to be emulated in some way. So here's what I'm seeing here.
Okay.
Um, Now, when Jesus is crucified, he's crucified with two other people, and um, it is commonly thought that so at the time of his death,
Right.
the the Roman soldiers who were there kind of took account of the situation. The Sabbath was coming. They needed everyone to be dead already and just come down off their crosses.
Yeah.
The two other criminals,
Mm-hmm.
they were still very much alive, and so what they did was they broke their legs. This was kind of a common way of speeding up the horrible, long, drawn out process of crucifixion, which was often um, the cause of death in crucifixion was suffocation. It was a
Yeah.
terrible way to die. But Jesus had been so violently treated before his crucifixion that he had died already. Like, he was just so exhausted, and his life had been so spent at that point that
Mm.
his death came relatively quickly, comparing it to at least the criminals and what was common, to the point where it's mentioned in John's gospel that uh, they broke the legs of the other criminals, and then they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, and then to make sure that it had happened, they pierced his side, right? But this was something that was not common. That this
Right.
would have been the situation, that they would pierce the side. So I'm just going to read quickly from John chapter 19 where that happens. um, So instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. And then John, the gospel writer, includes a little parenthetical note here. He who saw this has testified so that you also may believe. His testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth. Um, he's referring to, I think, and I think it's pretty obvious, uh, one of the disciples of Jesus who was close enough to Jesus's crucifixion to see what was going on. And we know that that is a reference to this disciple whom Jesus loved, someone who was close enough to actually see what was going on. All of the other disciples have scattered, but here is the beloved disciple who is close enough to see what is going on. So here we get then in John chapter 20, Jesus appearing to the disciples, and he then showing them, he says, peace be with you. He shows them the wounds in his hands and on his side, and then says again, peace be with you. But then we get this note here that in verse 24, Thomas, who is called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So he didn't see the risen Jesus show the other disciples, his wounds. And all the disciples say to Thomas is, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and put my hand in his side, I will not believe. And the question I have is, how did Thomas know about the wound in his side? That he would know to mention that right now. Perhaps we can, maybe read between the lines. Well, the disciples may have told him, after they had seen him, or maybe whoever this beloved disciple is, whether it was Thomas or someone else or John, had said to the other disciples, I saw it, and here, let me tell you about what I saw. That's all possible. But also, what if Thomas knows because he is the beloved disciple who was there and saw it for himself? I think it's interesting then that when Jesus does finally appear to Thomas, he says, hey, put your finger here, put your hand here, do not doubt, but believe. And maybe, we could read some tone into that, that maybe Jesus is saying, sort of wagging his finger at him saying, do not doubt, you should have believed. But maybe all he's saying is, see, you don't have to doubt anymore. You've seen it for yourself. You can believe. And I think it's really interesting that of all of the things that are said about Jesus in the Gospel of John, perhaps one of the most clear references that's ever given that is as straightforward as possible, attributing divinity to Jesus. It is this statement by Thomas the doubter after he meets Jesus and sees the wounds in his hands and in his side. He says, my Lord and my God. And I almost think that we're supposed to perhaps see something in Thomas that is not something to be discouraged, but maybe something to be encouraged, that there isn't necessarily a sort of weakness in our relationship to God, or a weakness in our faith when we have moments of doubt where we wonder, God, I'm not sure about what you're doing right now. I need you to show up and do something to mitigate the doubt that I'm feeling right now. If you look down a little bit further in this passage, after Thomas says, my Lord and my God, Jesus says, have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. I'm not sure, again, that Jesus is saying, yeah, you've seen and believe, but everyone else is going to be more blessed who believes and does not see. That word blessed is the same word that Jesus uses in the Beatitudes. So they're basically two words for blessed in Greek, at least that we get in the New Testament. The one is eulogio, Um, and then the other word, which is used here and in the Beatitudes, Makarios. Eulogio is kind of more
Hmm.
like what we would say. Um, it's sort of like God actively does something, I don't know, like
I
this is
am
going to be
blessing you now, like,
exactly right.
okay,
It's
yeah.
like, I really need some like bread on my plate right now, and like it like appears or is given to you, like wow, like something has happened in this moment that has made my life better. Like that's what eulogeo means. Makarios is more, it's more a state of mind. The way I like to put it is sort of in line with maybe the Beatitudes, how Jesus puts it there. Um, but so here's the beatitude that I've kind of just made up, right? Blessed is Jennifer because she will inherit the family farm. So the family farm is not hers yet, but
Okay.
she will inherit it. And so, like in this moment right now, because she knows that future thing is happening or going to happen,
Hmm.
she like her life is better. Like she feels better about her life right now because she knows the better thing is coming.
Okay.
So,
Like
she
hope
works.
then. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely hope involved in Makarios, blessed. That she's going to work hard now on the farm that maybe she doesn't quite own yet, but she works on it. But she's going to work hard because she knows that she will own it someday, right? Like it'll be her farm someday, and she's happy now because there's some security in her life or in her future life
Yeah.
because of that. So it affects her life right now, but it's something that maybe is coming later. Um,
Okay.
I think that's what Jesus is trying to do with those beatitudes. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Um, and I think what Jesus is saying here is not that uh, the people who believe without having seen me are like better Christians and more blessed Christians than you, Thomas, because you only believed when you saw. No, they will be blessed in the sense that they know they will have your experience, and so
Hmm.
their life now is better. Like I am going to see Jesus one day, and I'm going to get to see his hands and his side, and because I know that will happen, then first of all I know that he is a risen Lord
Mm-hmm.
who tasted death but has been raised back to life. And because I know that, and because I know I will meet him one day, it makes my life better now.
Hmm.
And so I guess all I'm really trying to say here is I think perhaps in the Gospel of John, we're supposed to see this, uh, maybe I'll put it this way, faith seeking understanding. Um, that, we maybe it's really hard to see what God is up to at
Mm-hmm.
times.
Mm-hmm.
Like, dude, maybe in the middle of a pandemic, it's really hard to see what God is up to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure it's a bad thing or something that Christians should avoid doing, to say to God, like, God, I need you to show me something. Like I need to understand more. Maybe not like the big picture, but I need to understand that you are, as Thomas says, my Lord and my God. Like I need some evidence of that in my life. And maybe, I'm not talking about, having like a hard and fast, like bona fide miracle happen in front of you or something like that, but some evidence of like God's spirit with
Mm-hmm.
you. Um,
Because you've made
I
that
don't know.
contrast between two kinds of blessings, to say that like,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you're saying like I need both blessings, is kind of what you're saying. Like I need, that sign that says like you're right here right now. I got that bread. I got that, whatever it may be, and I've also got that sense of being blessed because of something I'm going to receive in the future. And I always remind people, I think it's just part of the responsibility of a preacher when you're looking for that blessing, that sort of like bread on my plate blessing. It often comes to us through other people that may not even be Christians. But
Hmm.
that bread often has a bit of a history before it gets to our table. And so
Hmm.
sometimes it's our turn to receive, but sometimes it's our turn to give as well. So I know a lot of people. You're getting a lot more traffic giving and receiving at the food pantry. I know at
Yeah.
at your church. And as we talk about blessings, like it's a great way to share with other people, but
Yeah.
also it's an answer to people's prayers.
Yeah. Yeah, right. There's sort of right a mutual benefit, right? In um, you know, being being generous has a positive impact on the giver's life as
Mm-hmm.
much as it has on the one who receives what has been given. And um, I think,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's an important part of almsgiving. I think that's something that you've helped me to understand a little better in terms of like Catholic spiritual disciplines.
Oh yeah, we're huge on the whole like works. We could go into the whole
Well,
faith works thing. Yeah,
well, I
yeah.
mean, Aristotle, I mean, not a church father by any means, but Aristotle says, you repeatedly do. Um, or
Virtue ethics.
I, I,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's more a summary of. I'm
Mm-hmm.
paraphrasing him.
No,
I don't think
yeah, virtue ethics. That's such an important part,
absolutely.
and
Like the more you do it, the more you be like the more you give alms, the more you become a generous person. Like the more you like are transformed in internally because of the thing you've done externally.
and most importantly, I think like this is how we become closer to God as you become more godlike. You do the sorts of things that
Hmm.
God does. You're taking up, like like David is after God's own heart. He's
Hmm.
doing godly things all the time. Sometimes not so godly things, but even when he gets it wrong, like his ability to admit it and seek out forgiveness and mercy.
Hmm.
Um, so where I thought you were going for this before you blew my mind.
Thomas is the
Is
beloved
Thomas?
disciple.
He was the beloved disciple the whole time. So was just more of like at the narrative level. So we talk about sometimes like breaking the fourth wall. Somebody
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
reaches out and like an actor is aware that there's an audience out there. And so of course the Gospels are written with the understanding that they're read by people that are believers or are maybe not believers, but they're curious, they're open to belief, and so whoever the beloved disciple was, whether it was John, whether it was Thomas, whether it was some total stranger, they are our perspective into the story.
Hmm.
They're Luke Skywalker, they're Harry Potter, they're the person whose shoes we are filling as we go through the story. So it makes it easier for us to imagine that we're there at the foot of the cross and that
Hmm.
Jesus is asking us to take Mary as our mother and to care for her. That we're there at the Last Supper, not just watching it like Da Vinci from a distance, but that we're there, right there, leaning in on Jesus closer
Yeah.
than anyone else. So whoever he was historically, it's this sense of being there, and
Hmm.
um, and so this last story here has always had that sort of as it trails off here, like any morality story, it sort of like trails off at the end, and you're like, well, I don't want to die like that guy, or like I don't want to get stuffed in an oven, or so there's this sense of like, my Lord and my God, have you come to believe because you've seen me? So here's this moment where it starts to like, for me anyway, reading this, it starts to separate a little bit. I'll get back to what you said in a second, but it's sort of like, okay, so here, as we're leaving the story, we're separating from Thomas, we're going back to our life, and what are we taking with us? So Thomas was right there in the moment, and he had it a little easier than us. So now we're starting to see some differences between him and us. He got to see all these things firsthand. He got to put his hand, here in this moment if he really
Hmm.
wanted to, and we can't do that. So Jesus here breaking the fourth wall and with a direct message to the audience. Blessed are those who've not seen and have believed. But I love going back now that you've sort of wove this in here, being able to go back and say that it's Thomas that we were with the whole time. And so we're left to sort of make our own conclusions here. Are we going to believe? Are we going to be
Hmm.
blessed? Does this make sense to us? Because we didn't get to see it ourselves. We get to see it through Thomas's eyes. We get to see it through John's eyes. We get to see it through the beloved disciples' eyes.
Hmm.
Um, do we believe this? Do we make it our own? And as believers, of course, we say yes. Um, but I guess I'm just so defaulting to like reading it as a story, and then
Yeah.
what hermeneutics, like, so how does the story interact with the person that's reading it, and how is it changing you as you're reading it?
Yeah.
So I thought that's where you were going to go, and then you're like,
That's
but
funny.
what if Thomas is the
It
beloved
was,
disciple?
it was it's like an episode of Scooby Doo where the mask comes out. It's like, it was you all along.
That's interesting. I'll have to keep thinking about that. That's
So,
gonna stick with me.
and for me, I guess where that kind of takes on some life in our current situation is, um, maybe there's some pressure. Like I feel this pressure to, uh, like really rise to the occasion in this moment. To like be the best version of ourselves that we can be,
Matthew
and
Kelly. Yep.
and that's a ton of pressure for everyone to be feeling right now.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think this is maybe a passage for like the ordinary Christian,
Mm-hmm.
who maybe feels a little bit afraid, right? Maybe has a little bit of doubt, maybe
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have the answer that they are hoping for, and yet like here we are living through it anyway. And I think in Thomas there's this maybe hope that like, hey, that person's also a follower of Christ. That person also um like gets to be a close friend of Jesus. Um and I think for me that's reassuring, at least, that uh maybe we don't have to, who gets to the tomb first? Is it Peter or the other beloved disciple?
The
I
beloved
can't
disciple
remember.
gets there first, I
Yeah,
think, but then
yeah,
he
yeah.
defers to Peter. He
Yeah.
waits.
Yeah.
Peter can go in first. I don't know if he's
Right.
nervous or if he's just
Right,
like,
right.
oh, Peter's higher ranking. So
Like we don't have to be, the Peter all the time
right.
who, you know, uh is the first one to speak, is the first one to act.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes it's okay to be this other person, and know that like God is still with you.
And I think that's a callback to when I first started talking about the marks and the wounds that Christ bears. Sometimes we're not perfect believers. Sometimes we're hurt. Sometimes we're wounded. Sometimes belief is difficult. It's okay. Even as ministers, we've had our struggles, our crosses to bear. We've had that moment of
Sure.
Thomas where we're like, oh
Absolutely.
my gosh, what am I doing here? And I think it's okay to have those moments, as Thomas did. He's ultimately still able to come to belief. He's
Mhm.
ultimately still able to trust in God. And his history doesn't change. He still is a person that's had those doubts and perhaps feels guilty about that going
Mm.
forward, but that's just, it is what it is. And Jesus accepts him
Mhm.
and blesses him.
That's a good story right there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, anything else about the passage that jumped out, I guess, as we wrap up?
I mean, not anything that we have to talk about, but I just always think it's interesting that that last chunk, verses in chapter 20, right? Like Jesus did so many other things that you'll never know about, right?
Yeah,
It's,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, I want to know.
Yeah, and there's such an appetite for that. I think even just speculation, whether it's alternate
Yeah.
gospels or novels, people have tried so hard to fill in those gaps over the years, trying to imagine what it might have been like. It's a good reminder that we're getting the very best of the best. John, in particular, is very careful about how he structures those miracles and which ones he
Yeah.
chooses to present and in what order, with that intention of helping us to come to belief, which is the
Yeah.
ultimate goal here. As he's ending up with Thomas here, that's the whole goal, is so that we can go from unbelief to belief.
Yeah.
There's a reason the story's written. It's not even trying to like holistically and accurately capture the entire life of Jesus. It's like, it's just, he's got an agenda. I just don't always think that is a
Yeah.
bad thing, but he's cut down a lot just to get to the parts that will help us to come to belief.
Yeah.
Um, so
That's a good word.
yeah. Well, thank you very much, Aaron. And the other thing we overlooked, we didn't get into the Holy Spirit. Breathing on him. Pentecost is coming, so maybe that'll be another video, another time to dive
May
into that.
31st.
Yeah. If we're still homebound, but I wouldn't mind doing videos going forward, even if we do. So thank you very much for
this is fun.
joining. Yeah, and I'll have this up a little later. So
excellent. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. God bless you wherever you are in both senses of the word, and look out for opportunities to be a blessing to others. And if you need prayers, certainly be in touch with our churches. And we're passing around. I know on our side at least, we're passing around prayer lists. People that need intentions. A lot of people volunteering to help out with groceries and things like that. So if you have need, please ask. All right.
Great.
God bless. Bye.